On the 2nd of April 1502, inside of his chambers within Ludlow Castle, the heir to the Tudor throne died. Arthur, the Prince of Wales, was the eldest son of Henry VII, and he was the brother of King Henry VIII. If Arthur had not died, then he would have become the king, and he was being prepared for this role. He had shortly before married Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess who would, of course, later become the wife of his brother Henry VIII. Arthur's role in history at the time was not the most significant, but his death and demise brought the reign of the most notorious king England had ever had on the throne, and his brother became the six-wifed king who brought a huge degree of chaos in his kingdom. But Arthur's death was rough, and preparations for his burial were swift. But it was noted that the king was embalmed so well there was no need for a traditional lead coffin for him to be buried inside of. This, of course, is strange, but what is the story behind this? Arthur Tudor, along with his wife, Catherine of Aragon, went towards the Welsh marshes following their marriage, and they established a household at Ludlow Castle. But since his wedding, the prince had been growing weaker, and this was a great concern for his father, Henry VII. Arthur was involved in governing Wales and the border regions, and in the March of 1502, he and his wife were struck by a serious unknown illness which has been described as malign vapour, which proceeded from the air. There were many different causes of death suggested for Arthur Tudor, as he never recovered from his illness, and he may have suffered from sweating sickness, tuberculosis, which was known as consumption at the time, but also the plague or the flu. Both he and his wife were treated for the same condition, but Catherine did manage to recover. But Prince Arthur would not, and he died at the age of 15 inside of his chambers in Ludlow Castle on the 2nd of April 1502. The news of the boy's death reached his father, the king, 2 days later, and he, along with his wife, Elizabeth of York, the Queen, were heartbroken, and he burst into tears. Elizabeth of York promised her husband that God had helped him to be king, and that they had other children, which was no good at comforting the king, as his heir lay dead inside of his bedchambers. This was a huge problem for England, as Arthur had been prepared to become king himself, and his brother Henry then became the heir to the throne. However, at the time, inside of Ludlow Castle, there were preparations made for his funeral, and his burial would take a while to organise. But Arthur Tudor died from an illness which was said to have been contagious, and this was the belief at the time, and because of this he needed to be buried quickly. Inside of his bedchamber, Arthur Tudor's body was to be embalmed. At this time, members of the royal family had a detailed embalming process which would today be considered rather brutal. Body preservation was something that had been around for centuries, and it was performed by physicians and surgeons, and the aim of embalming was to delay the decay process between the death and also burial. This allowed the body to be moved to sometimes long distances for their burial, but Arthur Tudor would not be buried too far away. There would have been a belief that he could have been interred inside of Westminster Abbey, where his father, Henry VII, was building a new lady chapel, which he had hoped would be a Tudor mausoleum. The process for the embalming of Arthur Tudor involved the washing of the dead body, but then also cutting a large hole into the chest of the individual, and then the internal organs would be removed. This included the heart, and then the cavity was slooshed out with different fluids, and the aromatic herbs and spices were then placed inside of the internal cavity of the body, and this was to keep away decay. The reason for this was to delay decomposition, but then the body would be wrapped in cerecloth, a heavy wax-dipped cloth, which the body was then sealed inside of, and then other balms and ointments were used. Some cerecloths have helped protect bodies of medieval kings and queens still to this day, but the body of Arthur Tudor was noted for how well it had been embalmed. It was claimed that Arthur's corpse was disemboweled and that his internal organs were all removed, and that he was well embalmed before he was dressed with spices and other sweet stuff, such as those as bear the charge thereof could provide. The embalming fluid was very expensive, but the physicians who performed this on Arthur Tudor's body was so skilled that it was claimed that there was no need for a heavy lead coffin for his remains to then be placed into. Royal burials today still use incredibly heavy lead-lined coffins, which are aimed to preserve the remains and further keep decay away, but the decision was made that this was not needed for Arthur Tudor, and as he was so young, there was little chance that a royal coffin had been made for him. Because of the embalming of his body, there was no lead coffin, just a simple wooden chest or coffin, and his body was left to lay in state for 3 weeks after his death. The body remained inside of Ludlow Castle, but his body was then sprinkled with holy water, and this was sheltered in a large canopy, and he was then taken to the parish church of Ludlow, a short distance away, to await its movement towards its final burial place. The arrangements had been made for Arthur Tudor's body to be buried inside of Worcester Cathedral, and the funeral procession took place via the River Severn, and it was claimed that a special wagon upholstered in black and drawn by 6 horses, also caparisoned in black. His wife Catherine did not attend the funeral, as was tradition, but the Earl of Surrey was appointed as the chief mourner, and his mother and father, the King and Queen, also did not attend the funeral. The body arrived inside of Worcester Cathedral, and at the end of the ceremony, the heads of his household broke their ceremonial staves of office, and they threw them into the grave. 2 years after his death, a chantry chapel was erected over his grave, and today a large tomb featuring prominent coats of arms is on display. The tomb can still be seen today, but following his death, Catherine, Arthur's wife, would be betrothed to his brother Henry, who later became the King of England as Henry VIII. Arthur's relationship with Catherine later was used as an excuse for Henry VIII to dissolve his marriage, as he claimed it was against God for him to marry his dead brother's wife. Arthur Tudor was the man who was being prepared to be King of England, and if he had lived a few more years, then he would have been known as England's King Arthur. He was by all accounts a man who was being prepared well for kingship. However, his death signalled his brother Henry becoming the heir, and then the subsequent notorious King Henry VIII. Arthur's body following his death was so well embalmed there was no need for a lead-lined coffin, and the skill of the man who did this was noted in the history books. Today he still lies under the tomb inside of Worcester Cathedral, and he is remembered as the boy who should have been king. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.